Okay, so you want to build a super tall skyscraper. Not a nice 40-story office building. A super tall, anything over 300 meters. The kind of tower that ends up on postcards and skylines. Here's the part nobody tells you before you break ground. According to the people who actually track this stuff, 60% of all super tall buildings on Earth wouldn't even qualify as super tall without cheating. Empty spires, decorative crowns, floors nobody can stand on. The industry has a name for it, vanity height. And on the tallest building on the planet, it's 29% of the entire structure. 244 meters of the Burj Khalifa exist for one reason, so you can say the number. So before you spend $1 on steel, understand what you're actually buying. Partly a building, partly a very, very expensive flex. Let's talk numbers because expensive doesn't cut it here. A normal US high-rise 2026 pricing runs $250 to $700 a square foot for basic shell and structure. Go super tall and that floor disappears. You're now paying $1,000 plus per square foot before you've picked a doorknob, automated parking, triple glazed glass, and wind damping systems aren't upgrades at that height, they're the price of admission. Look at what real buildings actually cost. One World Trade Center, $3.9 billion, funded by $1 billion of Larry Silverstein's own 9/11 insurance payout, $250 million from New York State, and $1 billion in Port Authority bonds. JPMorgan's new headquarters at 270 Park Avenue. $3 billion on the low end. Some estimates put the full project closer to $4 billion for 2.5 million square feet. That's over $1,200 a square foot, making it the single most expensive office building ever built in New York City history. The Burj Khalifa, by comparison, looks almost cheap, $1.4 to $1.5 billion. Remember, labor in Dubai in the 2000s wasn't exactly union scale, but the sticker price is the beginning, not the end. You need a tuned mass damper, a multi-100-ton pendulum bolted near the top of the building just to stop it from swaying enough to make tenants seasick. Taipei 101's damper alone weighs 660 metric tons and cost $4 million. And that's a bargain, it only cuts the sway by 40%. Then there's air. Not the air inside your building, the air above your neighbor's buildings. In dense cities, you don't automatically get to build as high as you want. You have to buy the unused height, called air rights, off of whoever owns it next door. In prime Manhattan, that runs $200 to $600 a square foot. Billionaire Ken Griffin, along with Vornado and Rudin, paid St. Patrick's Cathedral $312.50 a square foot for up to 525,000 square feet of unused air, a deal worth up to $164 million for space that will never contain a single physical brick. Just permission. You don't just decide how tall your building gets to be, the city does, block by block, and then you go shopping to get around it. Every parcel of land comes with a maximum buildable square footage baked into the zoning code. Want to go higher than that number allows? You need to buy the unused rights from a neighboring lot, a church, a low building next door, anyone sitting on height they'll never use. No neighbor willing to sell, no extra floors. Your skyline ambitions are quite literally hostage to whether a 19th century cathedral needs cash this year. Then comes the approval gauntlet. Community board hearings, environmental review, structural sign-off from engineers who have to prove mathematically that your building won't fall over in a 100-year wind event or a design basis earthquake. Wind tunnel testing alone for a true super can run into the millions, and it happens before a single foundation pile goes into the ground. And once you're past all that, you're locked into an engineering curve that punishes ambition. Structural cost doesn't rise in a straight line with height, it curves upward because every additional floor adds load that the floors below have to carry. Past roughly 40 stories, you're not just building more of the same building. You're building a fundamentally more expensive structural system to hold up the extra height, which is exactly why elevators start eating your building alive. More on that in a minute. Here's the mechanism, and it's not what most people assume. You'd think a skyscraper prints money through rent, tenant pays per square foot, building collects, done. In today's market, that math is brutal. National office vacancies sat at 17.6% to 18.6% through early to mid 2026. In hard-hit markets during the pandemic hangover, real availability, including sublease space, ran 20% to 30%. Nationally, roughly 170 million square feet of office space sits on the sublease market alone. Tenants who signed a lease and now can't even give the space away. That vacancy flows straight into debt. Office loans packaged into commercial mortgage-backed securities hit an 11.66% delinquency rate in August 2025, the worst level ever recorded for the sector, worse than the 2008 financial crisis peak. So the traditional play, build tall, lease it out, collect rent, refinance, has been quietly breaking for half a decade, which is why the buildings that actually get built at super tall height increasingly aren't rental plays at all. They're owner-occupier trophies. JPMorgan didn't build 270 Park Avenue to lease it to strangers. They built it to house 10,000 of their own employees and to put their name on the tallest bank headquarters in the world. The return isn't a cap rate. It's brand, recruiting power, and a permanent marketing billboard visible from 3 boroughs. For everyone else, the developers building on spec, hoping to lease floor by floor to tenants who don't yet exist, cap rates are only just starting to stabilize after years of compression pain, expected to tighten a modest 5 to 15 basis points in 2026. That's the industry's word for, we think the bleeding might be slowing down, not it's over. Now, the part that never makes it into the renderings, how much of your very expensive building you don't actually get to use. Every supertall needs a structural and mechanical core, elevator shafts, stairwells, ventilation risers, running dead center through the entire height. That core doesn't generate a single dollar of rent. It just holds the building up and moves people through it. The taller the tower, the more elevator banks you need, because no single elevator can efficiently serve both the 5th floor and the 95th floor. You need express banks, local banks, sky lobbies where people transfer between them. Each additional bank is more shaft, more counterweight, more square footage quietly subtracted from your rentable floor plate. Then there's vanity height, the part of the building that exists purely for the record book. The Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, the industry's own scorekeeper, says 60% of the world's supertalls wouldn't qualify as super tall at all without decorative, unoccupied spires stacked on top. You're paying full structural and engineering cost for height that will never hold a tenant, an apartment, or a desk, just to clear a number. And you're fighting physics the entire way up. Wind load increases with height, so past a certain point, you can't just add floors. You need damping systems, deeper foundations, thicker cores, all engineered by firms who charge accordingly, all to solve a problem a 40-story building never has in the first place. Every one of these systems is invisible to a tenant walking through the lobby. None of it is optional once you've committed to the height. Start with a case that actually paid off, barely, and only because the money model wasn't really about rent. One World Trade Center opened in 2014 at $3.9 billion, financed on the back of $0.9 billion, financed on the back of insurance money and government bonds after 9/11. Over 20 years and roughly $20 billion across the entire World Trade Center site, it eventually filled, but it took nearly a decade and government anchor tenants to get there. It worked because it wasn't really underwritten like a normal office tower. It was underwritten like a national monument that happened to also need tenants. Now the failures, and there are a lot of ways to fail at 800 feet in the air. Millennium Tower in San Francisco, completed in 2009, has sunk 16 inches into the bay mud below and now tilts more than 2 inches to the northeast. The fix was estimated at $100 million. Homeowners Association lawsuits sought $200 million from the developer and engineers. One individual resident alone sued for $500 million. In 2020, the city started driving new support piles down to bedrock, and in 2021 had to halt the repair after the building unexpectedly sank another inch on one side, mid-fix. In 2023, residents got hit with a surprise $6.8 million bill just to cover repair cost overruns, on top of everything already spent. 432 Park Avenue on Billionaire's Row, one of the most expensive residential addresses on Earth, has thousands of cracks in its facade and more than 1,893 documented construction defects. More than 20 water leaks since 2017. Elevators that stall while the tuned mass dampers are actively working to stop the building from swaying, trapping residents inside mid-ride. The condo board sued for $125 million in 2021. In 2025, a new lawsuit demanded more than $165 million, alleging the developer misrepresented the extent of the cracking to city regulators. And then there's the one that never even got that far. Golden Finance 117 in Tianjin, China, 597 meters tall, topped out in 2015. Designed to be one of the tallest buildings on Earth, sat completely unfinished and unoccupied for a decade after its developer collapsed financially. It currently holds the Guinness World Record for world's tallest unoccupied building. Construction only resumed in 2025 on a fresh $78 million permit with a new completion target of 2027, 12 years after it topped out. Best case, you're a JPMorgan, not a spec developer. You build for yourself at $1,200 plus a square foot, and your return isn't rent. It's a headquarters that recruits talent, anchors your brand, and never has to sit on a leasing market you don't control. There's no payback period in the traditional sense because you were never planning to sell. Middle case, you're a developer building on spec in a strong market at $700 to $1,000 a square foot, betting on prime tier tenants who are still, even in this environment, driving demand for trophy space. You lease up slowly over 5 to 8 years, cap rates stabilize the way 2026 forecasts suggest, and you eventually refinance into a stable asset. It's a long, patient game, and a lot of things, interest rates, tenant demand, your own construction schedule, have to go right in sequence. Realistic case, you build during a rate cycle that turns against you. Lease up drags because national vacancy is sitting near 18% and sublease space is flooding the market, and your construction loan comes due before your building is full. This is exactly the environment that produced an 11.66% CMBS delinquency rate. And if you have to sell into that market, look at 350 California Street in San Francisco, a 22-story office tower that traded for $300 million in 2019 and sold for $61 million in 2023. Same building, same address. An 80% loss in 4 years because the office market underneath it collapsed faster than the mortgage did. Here's the part that should bother you more than the price tag. Nearly a third of the tallest building on Earth exists for no functional reason at all. It's there so a number can appear in a headline. An entire tower in China stood finished but empty for 10 years. Not because nobody wanted to work there, but because the money behind it evaporated before the elevators ever turned on. A luxury tower on the most expensive residential street in Manhattan is currently suing its own developer over defects, while the tuned mass dampers installed to stop it from swaying occasionally strand people in the elevators built to move them. Skyscrapers were never really a rental income asset class. They're a monument asset class that occasionally, if the market cooperates, also happens to generate rent. Put that same $3 billion into almost anything else, an index fund, a portfolio of mid-rise buildings nobody photographs, and history says you'd sleep considerably better and probably end up richer. But nobody puts an index fund on a postcard. So if you're still set on it, build for yourself, not for tenants who may or may not show up. Budget for the vanity height you don't need, and remember that somewhere in Tianjin, a building has been standing, finished on the outside and empty on the inside for over a decade, waiting for someone else's money to finally turn the lights on.